awesome to be here today. I'm happy to be in Goose Lake, Iowa, where I had not been before. So, as she said, my topic is ag arts. And so what is ag arts for me? So ag stands for agriculture. And I think about agriculture as humans' relationship to the land. And arts for me is humans' expression, and in this case, of that relationship. So I have a question for you guys first. How many of you, by show of hands, would go here? Everybody know where here is? This is Mars. How many people go? All right. So we have a few. We have the adventurers. How many people would stay there? All right, not yet. All right. So you would be the homesteaders if you were going to stay there. In the meantime, I absolutely love the planet that we're currently occupying and part of, and that is Earth. So I think of Earth as this huge symbiotic relationship, and it's a collaboration between all of us. We constantly make decisions, whether it's to do with the agricultural relationships, the expressions we have, the buildings we build, the artwork that we share with our communities. All of those things impact one another and at a bunch of different scales. And so what I want to do with you guys today, since we don't have time to go on vacation, but I think vacation and travel gives us perspective of place, is we're going to go on basically a journey at different scales. So we're going to zoom in on this location. So this is Goose Lake, Iowa. We're going to look at all of these scales from the furthest reaches, looking at our whole planet, all the way down to kind of the close scales. And while we're doing that, so here we are, Goose Lake, Iowa. While we're doing that, we're also going to go a little bit through time as well by looking at some maps that represent this place that we call home. So here we are. This is the North American continent. So this is kind of my zone of exploration. So I've been to all 50 states. I've been to all provinces except for 3, although I'm checking 2 off in about a month. And I've been to all of Central America and Mexico except for Panama. And every single time I get back from those vacations, those travels, I have a new perspective of Iowa and the place that I call home. I love this map. So this is the Ebstorf map. It is from 1300 AD. And this essentially was a map of their known world at that time. It's interconnected. So if you look, there's these different streets. There's a lot of written text, the stories of those places. There's a lot of images of animals and buildings in those places, and they're all connected together. And the creator of the map situated themselves right at the center, and everything kind of expanded from there. And so we have a much broader perspective now and understanding of the world and of our state. So this is the United States. This is more or less our political country. And it's been represented in a whole bunch of ways over time. Initially, the earliest records that we have represented it mostly in this fashion. So it's looking at the watersheds and basically the transportation networks on the landscape. Zooming in a little bit closer, this is kind of our region, and not quite our state, but our region. And so some of the earlier maps show, again, watersheds. So we are located roughly right here, Goose Lake, Iowa. Iowa itself, actually, probably on this map would have been a bit larger. The thing that I found interesting on this map, those of you who are familiar, it's called the Moingona River at this point in time. This would be the Des Moines River today. And it ends in this incredible lake that's full of islands. And so those of you who know Iowa, we don't have a lake that's full of islands. But early stories, as people were exploring and traveling, described this part of the Des Moines River as this very slow, large expanse of water. And so I kind of dug into that, and I was like, what? How did that happen? Or like, how did that happen? What was it occurring there? And so the Des Moines Lobe, the last glacier that would have come down on Iowa, flattened that part of the state out heavily. And as it was receding, it was kind of creating these prairie potholes in this very waterous landscape. So the early explorers, talking with the Native Americans, that was their understanding of that place, which I think is fascinating. So zooming in, same map. I think we're probably close to this lead mine in the Macaret River. And so our identifying, again, the Moingona River here, and this would be the Rock River. So I think it's fun. This map I wanted to show you guys, so this is 1843. We no longer have the lake at the end of the Des Moines River. It has kind of turned into a series of prairie potholes here. But what we do have, and it's hard to see on this slide, but Deep Creek is right there. So those of you who are local, that is your guys' creek. And this is the first map, 1843, that it makes the map, which I thought was pretty exciting. So we're zooming in again here. This is where we start to transition from a landscape that used basically geological, and maybe watersheds to look at the land, and we start applying this. And so this is the Jeffersonian grid. And after the Louisiana Purchase was made, they needed a way to sell and allow new immigrants and settlers to occupy this section of the United States. And this was basically the designed structure that they overlaid over the United States west of the Mississippi. And so this is simultaneously a map that's showing, interestingly enough, ownership of an occupation of the Native American lands to the left, and the Jeffersonian grid moving in on the right. So this slide starts to show a little bit of that grid taking shape. You can slightly see the road system. And so not too long later, this is 1850s, we have a map that shows the entire state of Iowa in its entirety with all of the different counties that now were basically available to be occupied. And these little counties would then work together with the townships on the inside of them to make decisions about that part of the state. Interestingly enough, that was kind of the surface structure that was overlaid in this part of the United States. At the same time, over the last 150 years, we've been working below the surface of Iowa as well. So in this map, this is the United States, you get to see this region right here. So this is a very Midwestern construct that's showing subsurface drainage. So we did a lot of work on the top to divide this land out to the people that were now living on it, but we also drained much of the land. We're fortunate that we get a lot of rainfall here, but to grow a lot of crops, we needed to move some water. And so water was the key feature that was driving all of the installation of these. And so I like to think about a different way of maybe organizing ourselves, and that would be in these communities as opposed to counties. And these are the watersheds of Iowa. And so where we're at today is the Maquoketa watershed. And so on the left, you can see the different roadways, the towns, the cities in this area, and this is your water community. So if you were going to band together and work to increase water quality, work to increase environmental concerns or work on environmental concerns, this would be the community that you could work with on those things. And the map on the right, I just absolutely love. It's beautiful. It's a topographic, basically an elevation map, but I think it's a stunning image. And I'm a visual person, so. Getting a little bit closer here, you can really start to see the townships and also the grid on the landscape. So these are the actual literal creation of roads, hundreds of miles of roads in Iowa on the landscape, realizing the Jeffersonian grid. So 1875, this is the Andreas Atlas, and I love this map as well. It was an earlier map, and interspersed between the counties and the township maps are these beautiful drawings of basically farmsteads, hand-drawn, that represented the different names and locations. And so we have the post office here. This might have had an image associated with it, the family that had that farmstead, as would have this. Something else that's interesting about this map that the locals here might notice is this is an R. It was Deer Creek Township originally. It is now Deep Creek Township. So an early map maker either made a mistake or maybe later it changed its name. So those of you who understand kind of how a township works, within each township there are 6 by 6 square miles, and they're divided up. Starting at the top right, you go 1 through 6, 7 through 12, 13 through 18, and on down. And so all of this was available basically to occupy and own. And this is how it was sold before people even arrived at the land. I like this, I guess, distance photograph because it starts to show really clearly the watersheds, the landscape here kind of on the left, which is much more rolling and has hills, and on the right, they were able to really realize the roads much more clearly because it was a much flatter surface. Now I want to go through time quickly. So this is the area we were just at, only this is an 1850s map. And so what I have outlined here in orange is more or less where Goose Lake is. So this is 1875. The lake moved from the top down just slightly because of the railroad moving through. This one's fascinating to me, 1930s. So these people probably had just arrived on the land, and they wanted to farm all the land that they had purchased. So a lot of the land that was actually under Goose Lake, which is a beautiful wetland today, was turned into these fields. And so it was completely divided up, drained, and at least for 10 years, they attempted to farm it. By the 40s, they'd kind of given up and let it go back. And it kind of continues that trend as we move through time. So this is the 80s, which I think is exciting because the building we're in today pops up. 90s, 2000, I think this is 2010, yep. And then the last one, 2015. And we drove in this morning and I was pleasantly surprised by this beautiful symphony of frogs. If you drive through this road right here, it was fantastic. Getting a bit closer, I like to think about this as the landscape perspective. So if we were all to stand on the roof of this building and look out across the land, we would start to see kind of these hills, these buildings, and it's close enough that we understand them. Another thing I want to talk about on that slide. These drainage ditches are the surface drainage ditches. Below those are these. This is a pattern that I think is gorgeous and beautiful. It's something you see in fabrics. It's something you see in all sorts of designs in the arts. But in this case, it's for water drainage. And this is the subsurface drainage we saw on the map earlier. And it comes in usually the pattern on the top right, the herringbone, and also the one on the bottom right, the random, which usually follows the topography. And so an example of that, kind of a combination of that, is in a farm here in Iowa. And when you install them, you get to see the pattern, but after that, they kind of vanish and they're unseen. Something that I had always taken for granted. I never really thought much of them, but if you do the math, we have way more plumbing in our fields than we do in our houses and buildings. And that's pretty fantastic. So I was inspired by that. So I am an artist and a maker and a designer, and so I combined a little bit of ceramics and a little bit of photography and a little bit of woodworking in this piece here. And so I was trying to share that information with some that maybe didn't realize what I had not realized for a long time, or maybe take for granted that. And so these are the 1x1 grids with the overlay of the drain tiles, as well as the farmers and families that are occupying that landscape. And so the silos that have faces on them represented the families who were still occupying the landscape, and these structures representing some of the families that have moved on to other places. All right, so this is the scale I wanted to talk to. That's the landscape scale. And so here I like to start using photography as a way of sharing information with people. And so if you looked from the rooftop here, you could look out and you might see a view like this. So this is a photograph that I took at Iowa State University. This is Central Campus. This is a 360-degree view. So imagine I'm taking 24 photographs, and I'm taking them side by side by side by side, so left to right, in a full 360-degree view, and you line them up side by side, and you get this beautiful panorama. 360 degrees, but you're looking straight at it. There's an alternative to that you can line them up kind of like a pie or a pizza, and you end up with an assemblage like this, and images like this. And this, to me, changes it from a landscape perspective into a tiny planet. And so this is Central Campus at Iowa State University, and from there you can really think about this as a system and as a community. And you can do this all over the state of Iowa. So this is just south of Ames. This is a tiny little town that I absolutely love. And it really does a great job of emphasizing basically objects on the landscape, communities on the landscape, and making them beautiful. And so a lot of times we take these for granted. We might drive past in that one by one repetition, but this does a way of calling them out. You can also do this with structures to make people kind of look at things that they take for granted in a new light. And grain bins. I love these grain bins. They don't necessarily all have use or purpose at this size anymore. These would have been from the era where we had a lot of different types of seeds we were saving from year to year. Getting in a little bit closer, we start to look at the structures on the landscape. For this, as an artist, I wanted a different type of camera, and it didn't exist. So these are some drawings of this camera. And so this camera photographs onto porcelain spheres, and it takes, again, that 360-degree image, and it turns it into a 360-degree, three-dimensional object. And so if you are not able to go to these locations, you can take somebody there by bringing that location to them. And so as the viewer interacts with these objects, they have to walk around them. So simultaneously kind of moving through space while looking at a place. A little bit closer, we can start seeing the cars, air handling units, objects that are created. From that creation, I want to take a moment to talk about one object that absolutely blows my mind. And hopefully you can see this. This tiny little thing right in the middle of this frame. So this frame I found actually in a dumpster. It's from 1894, I think. And I put in the middle of it a piece of corn. And this piece of corn is one of the most incredible collaborative art pieces that I'm familiar with. I was fortunate enough to work at the North Central Plant Introduction Station in Iowa for a few years, and I got to sort beautiful, like rainbow color seeds of corn from around the world. And people have been selecting their favorite flavors, colors, harvest, bounty. Basically, all those things have been selected for thousands of years and passed down from person to person. And now, as we know, our state is covered with it, and it is, to me, the most beautiful collaborative art piece. So I want to finish, now that you've maybe seen my perspective or a perspective of aerial photographs and maps throughout time, I want to finish by saying it's up to you guys to fill these frames with what you want your legacy to be in Iowa. And with that, thank you very much.